Hi, I'm Emmett Benezra, and I'm here with Nick Johnson of Prism Analog in Portland, Maine.
Hello.
So, the first question I have for you is what would you consider your job title?
I am the executive director for Prism Analog, and then along with that go a variety of subtitles: studio manager, engineer, uh, social media maven. You know, you name it. I'm kind of doing it.
So, with all the different titles you have, what do you typically like to do in your job?
Well, this is a special job because it's not my main job, so I get to have a little more fun with it and do things a little bit more on my terms. So in in this place, this is a kind of a world that I created to be inspiring and to be kind of sonically optimized as far as one can be in the middle of downtown, where you've got traffic and alley noise and rumblings and so forth, apartments above us. So that's been my main challenge and kind of what I have enjoyed doing here in this space is just setting up a world for people to feel comfortable and creative in.
Great. So, what would you consider a typical day working this job?
Well, it depends if it's a recording day, because the typical recording day would be like 10 a.m. start, and the band will come in and bring all their stuff in and generally take up all the available floor space and kind of get to know the space a little bit before we talk through sort of what the day-to-day schedule is going to be like if they're here for more than one day. Sometimes we'll just have a schedule for, say 5 days. First 3 days we're going to track, and then the final 2 days we'll mix or something like that. But on recording days, I like to get here about an hour before the artist and make sure that there's fresh coffee and that the garbages are empty. And I have an intern who helps me with that stuff too.
Um, this may be redundant, but what would you consider your duties and responsibilities?
I think my responsibility is to keep the organization above water. Keep the bills paid, make sure that the rent and the heat and the electrical bills are not falling behind, and that we have a little bit of money to do, some things with. I'm also in charge of procuring all the equipment and the gear, so that's been something that I've spent a lot of time doing. But I'd say mostly, along with that, to help kind of figure out who the decision makers are at any point. So, for instance, I called a meeting with a few people last week to discuss potentially moving to a new space, and so for that, I had people who I trusted who come here to use the space and take advantage of it frequently. So a little bit of a brain trust to help me make decisions like that. In the past, I've had a full board. I don't have a full board right now. So my responsibility also includes sort of future planning and where things go from here.
Here may be another foolish question, but what would you say the setting of your job is?
It's a vintage analog wonderland presided over by a dodecahedron.
And another silly question, what would you consider the hours that you work?
Good question. I'd say I probably put in close to 40 hours a week when it comes to all the stuff that I do in this building and outside this building to promote and keep this place going and growing, and answering emails from people and talking about projects and upgrading the studio and that sort of thing. So it's close to a full-time job, even though I do have a real full-time job. Maybe it's closer to 30 hours, but it's quite a lot.
Um, What high school courses do you think would be helpful in this job?
Well, um, certainly STEM-based stuff is always going to be helpful, physics and various forms of math. But I think for me, anything that would allow you to have an internship where you could come and immerse yourself in another world like this uh, could be probably the most valuable, because you're not going to learn the specifics in any sort of high school class about audio engineering, but something that lets you explore a little bit, I think, is probably the closest thing I could think of.
I was going to ask what made you say physics, because that sounds like the other type of engineering, but
Well, it's all physical science when it comes down to sonics and how sound behaves in airspace and how it reflects off of objects in the space. The room, as they say, is the biggest instrument. So understanding how to avoid conflicts and certain types of distortion and comb filtering and stuff like that. When you clap your hands in here, it's pretty pleasing. It's a pretty pleasing sound. You're not getting slap back, and you're not getting early reflections, because kind of everything in here is coated with cellulose absorption material. So that's where the physics part comes in.
even though I may already know the answer, what education or training is required after high school?
I don't think anything is required on this path. It's a choose your own adventure. So if you can gather experience from a customer service job, that's going to help you interact with clients in a studio, I think that's great. Vocational, like you could certainly do like a certificate program in audio engineering. You could spend time honing your skills as a musician or a songwriter. Those would pay back in dividends down the road in a studio role. But I wouldn't say necessarily that a certificate program or a 2 year or beyond that audio engineering program is necessarily the best thing that you can do out of high school for this path. I think hands-on is where people these days are getting the most bang for their buck.
Yes, that's partially my thinking exactly. Are there any natural abilities needed to be successful in this job? If so, which ones?
Nothing that can't be learned. I don't think there's anything that you need to be born with. It helps to be able to have good hearing, and objectively good hearing, but also subjectively good hearing that you develop over time is just as important. Natural abilities, I think if you can, like I said, learn how to deal with customers throughout a variety of circumstances, that's going to be big for you. You don't have to be a musician. Most studio owners are musicians and in bands, and they offer that service, to their clients as well. Like if they don't have someone who could play drums or keyboards or something like that, they can step in, and that's really handy. So, but again, I wouldn't call it a natural ability. Some people are better inclined naturally toward instruments, but I think you could probably, if this is what you wanted to do, you could work with what you have and get really far.
Great. Any personal qualities or traits that are needed?
Patience, above all else. And whether that's repairing an amplifier, learning how to do something new, tracking down a problem, or meeting a new person, who might not have your same personality, or a coworker who might want to take the workflow in a different direction. I think it's all comes down to patience and being able to absorb things, even if you're not necessarily excited about them. That's what I would say.
Are there any skills needed that are already learned?
Sometimes, but like I said, you could come to this field without knowing anything specific, and with the right kind of motivation, pick it up. It does help to have experience listening to music. Sometimes people have a lot of listening skills that they don't know they have until they put them to work in a studio environment. So, if you're somebody who listens to a ton of music, you probably, without even knowing it, are aware of a lot of things that will become important in the studio.